encounters are fantastic. You can get amazing views. And from a photography point of view, it's sort of world class. Unlike going to America or Canada, bear watching in Finland or in Europe as a whole is generally done using specially built hides. And this is to ensure your safety, but also so that the bears sort of are much more relaxed. Most of these photographs, to give you an idea, if you're interested in photography in particular, are taken with either a 500mm or a 300mm prime lens. So it kind of gives you an idea of the focal lengths I'm having to work at. So the brown bears at the lodge we visit, which is a beautiful place right on the Russian border, actually uses hides that are situated in no man's land. So they're situated between Finland and Russia in a sort of a neutral zone, so to speak. And you have to get a special permit to go there, which is all organised when you book with us. And we get to spend our nights in specially built hides. So I hope you don't want a nice relaxing holiday, because when you go to Finland, it's an all-nighter, but it's well worth it, I promise you, because the wildlife opportunities and the photography opportunities really are world class. So the light changes depending on what time you're there. So you get into a hide typically between 4 and 5 p.m, say, and you can be there all the way until 7 in the morning. And what that enables you to do is maximize the light available during the sort of the Nordic summers, the boreal summers. It's light until in midsummer until gone 11 o'clock. And it gets light again, properly light, by about 1:30 in the morning. And in between, it's sort of a twilight light, and you can actually still photograph in it. This was taken at about 10:30 p.m, to give you an idea. Really nice side lighting, just as the sun's setting behind the trees. So it's a beautiful place, and the little flowers, if you're wondering, it's cotton grass. The forests here are also home to European elk. A lot of people will call them a moose, as they are known in America. This is a female. They're incredibly hard to see, actually, considering they're such an enormous animal. But if you're lucky, sometimes when you're driving, if you just open a window, you can get a quick snapshot. This is the only photograph I'd ever got of a European elk, having seen about 30 or 40 of them, because normally the minute you stop your car, they're off. And they never come to the hides because of the fact that there are bears and wolves and wolverines as well, all things that a moose doesn't really want to run into. It's important to say that there is bait used to bring in the predators. It's a really important thing to bring up because people always ask it. And the reason is you won't see most of these mammals otherwise, but it is also very heavily regulated. So any operator must operate under a license from the Finnish government. And if they break these protocols, their license can be taken away, and obviously their industry is destroyed. One of the things I would also say about that, though, is that Finland still actively hunts a lot of its predators. And so by providing tourism revenue, actually you're protecting the species. So although some people might think it's controversial to bait large animals such as this, actually it plays a really critical conservation role in the area, particularly for the grey wolf, more than the other two species. It's a sort of one of the only areas where wolves cannot be hunted because they are protected for this photographic purpose. So this picture on screen, you might not recognize this animal. Some of you might. It's a wolverine. It's the largest mustelid in the world. It's the easiest way to describe a wolverine is a badger on steroids. I mean, they are big, for one. They can actually kill, take down a fully grown reindeer, to give you an idea. But they also suffer from attention deficit disorder. They are pretty bonkers. They don't stay still. They're incredibly hard to photograph. So to get one sort of perched nicely up a tree is pretty unusual. And this one actually ran up a tree because a large bear came up beside it and sort of spooked it up. But they will climb trees looking for food as well, for potential prey, and scavenging for eggs and things like that. So they're a really resourceful animal and really characterful, and one of my favorite things to photograph. They are the hardest of the three to photograph, not because you don't see them, but just because they don't stay still. And when the light levels drop, particularly sort of, the twilight hours, that's when they seem to be most active typically. But this place in Finland, near a town called Kumo, is actually the most reliable place I've found to photograph wolverine. And I have so far photographed one on every single trip that I've been there. So it is an amazing place. And the bears, just to let you know, you can't guarantee anything with wildlife, but they're as close to guaranteed as you can possibly get. So the wolverines will come remarkably close, as will the bears, as if you're really lucky, will the wolves. This wolverine actually decided to start sniffing around my hide. On this occasion, I was in a one-man hide, but normally I'm in a hide with my group members and I can help them with their settings. Also spot wildlife for them, make sure that if they do fall asleep, I wake them up, that sort of thing. So it's a really sort of amazing encounter when one of these animals comes right up to you. And I will always try and make sure that you get the best out of any sighting. For me, though, the reason I discovered this place and wanted to visit it was because I found out that it was the most reliable place, probably in Europe, really, to see the grey wolf. This is, for me, a ghost-like animal. I'd wanted to see a wild wolf for as long as I could remember, since I was a child. African wild dogs are my favourite animals on the planet, and more about that later. But actually, the wolf for me is sort of a second, I suppose. They've got just that aura around them. And on this particular night, it's a beautiful setting, as you can see, amazing boreal forest and beautiful sort of open meadows in between. And the sun had just dropped, but all night I'd seen this white tree stump and I kept on thinking, oh my God, it's a white wolf. This is just incredible. I've got a wolf. And then I'd actually pick up my camera and look at it and I'd realize it was a tree stump. And this happened probably 30 or 40 times over the course of the evening. And just as my eyes were getting heavy and the light had sort of almost gone, and there was a slight mist forming above the cotton grass and through the trees, I saw this white shape and I thought, oh, it's the tree again. I've been duped once more. And then the tree moved and I realized actually it was an enormous white alpha female wolf who's known to the area and actually was at the time probably the most photographed wolf in the world. Sadly, she's passed away due to old age, but I can't even begin to tell you how magical it was to get this sighting. And she then proceeded to get closer and closer. And when I took this photograph, I can't even begin to describe the intensity of the stare. She was looking straight at me. Even though I was in a hide, she knew I was there. The intensity, I don't know, it just goes straight into your soul. Even talking about it now, I've got goosebumps. There's something truly magical about being sort of at eye level with a wild wolf and for there to be no aggression and just sort of a mutual understanding, I suppose. Obviously being in a hide, I'm not moving towards her and she's not sort of really moving towards me, but at 25 meters, it feels pretty intense and it's an experience I'll never forget. Every year I've been back, I've actually seen wolves on every trip. And in fact, last year, in 2019, not 2020, obviously, I took a group to the hides and one of my clients had always wanted to see a grey wolf. And, he said, what are the chances? And I said, well, look, to be honest, the chances are 50%, but if you can get sort of 80% on certain occasions, but we'll say 50%. And anyway, as we're opening up the hide and getting ready, I turn around and bizarrely only sort of 30, 40 yards away from me and my clients is a wolf just trotting across the meadow quite happily. And anyway, so it was his first ever wolf. He'd always wanted to see one. And sure enough, within the first 20 minutes of being in the hide, we had a wolf just strutting around right in front of us, completely unafraid. It was truly magical. And the light in this place, it is fantastic, as is the beautiful landscape. And it's referred to as paradise. It's actually a mistranslation, but it works very well. And I'm glad it's got the name because it really does work brilliantly. But I've seen an amazing number of wolves. And what's my favorite moment is when the wolves and the bears interact. It's just brilliant. The wolves are top dog, quite literally, and they will harass the bears and push them away. If it's only one wolf, a large male bear will chase them off. So it's amazing to watch the interaction. But sometimes, like in this image, they just tolerate each other. The sort of tan colored, the beige colored wolf is actually the alpha male. The bear is a medium-sized male. He's not yet sort of fully bulked out, but it is a male nonetheless. And in the back left, you can see another wolf. This is actually a lone wolf. It's not part of the pack, but it sort of hangs around the periphery. And the year that I took these images, I saw all 5 cubs from the litter as well. They all came out on the far side of that meadow you can see in the background. And it was just mesmerizing. I can't describe it. And they proceeded to spend about an hour howling through the landscape. And it was just breathtaking. The photographic opportunities are incredible. We always go in the summer just to maximize the light. And also with the wildflowers and things like that, it's a really beautiful time to go. So if you've always wanted to see a wolf or a wolverine, and even more so if you want to photograph them, I really don't know of anywhere better in Europe to do so. It's a fantastic place. And although it's quite a tiring trip, it's worth the effort, most definitely. But that's wildlife photography. It takes patience and a little bit of hard work. So as I said, my favorite animal was the wild dog in Africa. And so I thought from wolves, I would link to the wild dogs. And I led a trip to Mana Pools a couple of years ago and should hopefully be leading another one as soon as we can travel again. And Mana Pools is a place that is unlike anywhere else I've really ever been, to be honest. And I found out about it originally from a friend who lived in Zimbabwe. And then I sort of had done some research and I found out it was the best place to see wild dogs. So I knew I had to go there. And I don't know if anybody saw the Dynasties series on the BBC, but it followed a pack with an alpha female called Blacktip. And this is her pack. And these photographs were actually taken of Blacktip and her family. Unfortunately, again, she's passed away, but due to old age, she actually died when she was 15, which for a wild dog is pretty remarkable. And she had a litter every year for 12 years. So I think she did her species proud. And, you know, what an amazing ambassador to have a whole TV series sort of devoted to her as well was pretty spectacular. But this photograph, to give you an idea, was taken in my first hour in the park with a group. And what's amazing about Mana Pools, as you'll see in a minute, is the fact that you're not confined to a safari vehicle. And that doesn't just mean you go on a walking safari, you go out in your vehicle so you can track things like lions, wild dogs, things that move much faster than we can walk and have that natural sort of fear of people. You can track them in a vehicle. And then when you get close to where you want to be, or if you're a photographer, you can simply get out of the vehicle with your specialist guide, sit on the floor and be at eye level with a wild African predator or an elephant, and it genuinely is the best wildlife moment I've ever had. Was the first moment I got out on foot with African wild dogs. And to show you that they're not bothered when you're on foot, these are all taken on foot, these photographs, just to let you know. They decided to hunt a herd of impala by actually running through our group. So our group was stood and they ran around us and through us, and it was just incredible. On this occasion, they actually weren't successful. It was one of the few times they weren't. But this is a distant sighting, to give you an idea. So my clients are sat down on the floor with their cameras and we're just watching the dogs. You know, it's just an amazing place. And from a photographic point of view, being able to get low down is, you just can't beat it. It gives you the depth of field, the intimacy. It's a wildlife photographer's dream. It really is. And the wild dogs for me are just fabulous. This was our first morning in the park. So those photos were all the first evening. And we were driving along and we found the dogs. And I said to our guide, Nick, is it okay if we get out? And he went, yeah, sure. And the dogs, sure enough, just trotted straight towards us. And they literally walked within 3 meters, 4 meters of me, I suppose, and just trotted off on their daily mission, you know. And Nick has been studying these dogs for 20 years. He helped the BBC film the Dynasties program. And so his knowledge of these animals is what enables you to make the most of your photography. And that's a key thing with wildlife photography. Understanding your subjects leads to a much better wildlife photography experience, but also the photographs are improved drastically. It's just incredible to see the light changing in Mana Pools. It's got these beautiful ancient trees, open floodplains, sort of thick vegetation. It's a really lovely mosaic habitat, and it's perfect for wild dogs. Lots of prey, lots of room for them to run down their prey. And the light here, because of the dust that's kicked up from the soft alluvial soils, is just incredible. And this image here, to give you an idea, was one last beam of sunlight happened to pierce the canopy of the trees behind. And it just happened to light up the wild dogs from behind, and just create this magical scene. It is something I'll probably never experience again. And a picture really doesn't do it justice. It was breathtaking and something you just can't beat. But Mana Pools is about a lot more than just wild dogs, although I would say wild dogs for me is the primary focus. It's a great place to get low and photograph hippos. There's some brilliant pools. Mana Pools actually means 4 pools. So there are 4 large oxbow lagoons in the park, and these provide perfect refuge for hippos and loads of water birds. It's a really fabulous place. And the lion population and hyena population is absolutely brilliant. It's a really healthy spot. Some lion prides are okay with you being on foot, but keeping at a distance. We never had any issues with any predators at all. The guides are fantastic, so you don't need to worry. The lion images are all taken from a vehicle, just to give you an idea. I'm not that close on foot to a wild lion. I think that's a little bit foolish, personally. But another magic thing you can do here is join canoe safaris. It's a very beautiful, tranquil experience, and the opportunity to get close to elephants in the water is remarkable. African skimmers nest on all the sandbanks and fly overhead as you're watching the elephants, and it's not without its risks, a canoe safari, that's for sure, but it is one of the most magical experiences you can have. If you're wondering whether you need the best camera equipment when you join a photographic safari, or any of our safaris, to be honest, but particularly a photographic safari, sometimes I will put down my camera completely, and even not take it with me, perhaps, particularly on something like a canoe safari. But what I did here was I took my mobile phone, and actually this photograph was taken on my mobile phone. So it gives you an idea of the proximity that you can get to wildlife, and actually sort of the amazing pictures you can now capture on a phone. You don't need a huge SLR or a mirrorless system. You can actually get pretty good images with a point and shoot even, or a mobile phone. The elephants in Mana Pools are some of the best in the world. For me, there's a group of them that are fully habituated to certain guides. And the benefit of that is it means you can approach pretty close on foot without being sort of putting them under pressure, I suppose, making them uncomfortable. They've learned to trust certain guides, and if you approach them with the instructions of these guides, you can get remarkably close. This guy is a chap called Boswell. You can see he's got a tracking collar on him. That's actually to protect him from poaching, to make sure he doesn't leave the park. If he does, they can work out where he is and go and send a patrol to keep an eye on him. It also helps migration tracking movements and things like that. But he's learned, as you can see, to stand on his hind legs. And this means he can reach to the highest branches of the trees and pull them down to feed. And in turn, he then feeds a bachelor herd that follow him around pretty much all the time, 24 hours a day, all year round. He's got a little posse following him around, making the most of any food that's dropped on the floor, particularly during the dry season like this, when it's very dry and hot. What's also amazing is when you see wild dogs and the elephants together. So obviously there's the elephant here, but in the foreground, you might be able to see sort of 3 what look like out of focus logs. They're actually 3 wild dogs on the bottom right. But sometimes the elephants will work their way through an area like this feeding, and they stumble across the wild dogs like this, and they literally walk right at them. They're a predator, and the elephant likes to prove that they're much bigger than them. And you can see some amazing interaction with the wild dogs and the elephants. For me, and I think all the clients that joined me the last time I was there, the most magical experience was meeting this elephant. This is an elephant called Tusker. And having been working in the safari industry and leading safaris for many years, being a guide, I can honestly say that if I had ever seen a photograph like this, I would say, wow, that's so irresponsible. It's crazy people being that close to a wild African elephant. But this elephant was actually sort of saved by Nick, our guide. He fell very unwell, and Nick treated him and nursed him back to health, even though he's a wild elephant. And so Tusker, as his name, as he's known, has become completely trusting of Nick. Not everybody. This isn't something that everybody can do. And Nick will take you on, if he thinks it's the right situation, he will always start off at distance and slowly work his way forwards. And if you can literally stand within 5 meters of a full-grown bull elephant. And I think every one of my clients cried that day, and I'm pretty sure I cried too. It's truly remarkable. I mean, there are no words to describe such an encounter. The closest other experience I've had, I guess, is being close to mountain gorillas. But it is up there with the most magical wildlife moments. But for me, it's all about the wild dogs and just watching their behavior and getting down on the ground, watching them as they hunt and make kills. And you can see here my clients behind taking pictures. And the guides at all times are armed, just to let you know, and their experience is remarkable. They've been in the bush for 30 years, some of them, and do this every day of their life. And the wild dogs can kill up to 3 impala a day, depending on the size of the pack. So you can see a lot of action. And in the background of this photograph, you might actually be able to see a hyena sort of watching on, waiting for scraps. They wait for the carcass and then they run off with it. But in case you're wondering whether the dogs are disturbed by your presence and will change their behavior, I mean, I'm lying on the floor and the whole pack of wild dogs here are asleep. So the one you can see it is in focus, but then all of that mottled foreground is about 5 or 6 wild dogs fast asleep. Yeah, they're pretty stressed. They really weren't happy with us being there, that's for sure. They had a hard time. And this day for me was just magical, being on the ground with a pack of wild dogs. These are the puppies. This is 5 puppies playing and having fun. And you can see the sand coming off of their feet. And by using a nice wide aperture, you get this beautiful depth to it. So the sort of the clarity is really good. It's just an amazing place. And sometimes you're rewarded with the most intense encounters such as this. This adult was less than 10 meters away and just came and sat and watched me. And there was nothing to stop it coming closer, or, you know, but there wasn't any fear. There's no sense of aggression or anything like that. It's a pure intrigue in one another, and you just watch each other. And for me, that's what wildlife photography is all about, is that connection with an animal. And I know a couple of people would ask, like, what's your speciality? And I always say, well, for me, it's probably portraits. And I think this sums up why. So I'm just going to quickly move on to Zambia's South Luangwa. This is one of my favorite places. It's where I worked when I first left university. And I'm really lucky to lead numerous photographic safaris here. And it's just an amazing place, particularly for big cats, leopards, and galore. You can just see, well, you can see many in a week, hopefully. You know, a bad week is seeing 1 leopard in Luangwa. A good week is seeing maybe 10 to 15 individuals. So it's a really special place for leopards. And again, you know, for me, it's always trying about getting low if you can. So I work with our local guides who I know very well. And we make sure we park the vehicle, watching animal behavior so that we can kind of preempt their behavior and make sure we get ahead of them. And that's something we're always really keen to do on any African safari. It helps that having worked in Luangwa, I know a lot of the areas. And obviously the guides know it like the back of their hands. So between us, we can make a plan each day. If there's a particular interest in a subject, we can focus on that. I can spot as well as the guide. So it works really well. It's a really lovely dynamic. And it enables you to spend more time with your subjects. And rather than just doing typical portraits, you can watch them hunt. You can zoom in on beautiful features like this leopard's foot and start to see the world in a different way. I was desperate to spot a chameleon on a night drive with a spotlight. A green chameleon in a green tree with a spotlight is pretty tricky to do. And I was desperate last year to actually spot one, and I managed it after 3 weeks. But yeah, so it shows you that there's so much more on offer than on the big 5, and sometimes focusing on the finer details of the bigger animals or even the smaller ones is really special. So lions galore. I think in one day, one of my groups in 2019 saw 30 different lion. to give you an idea, from 3 different prides. So there really is a lot of potential for big cat photography, from playing with lions, sleeping a lot. That's one of their favorite pastimes, as many of you will know. But, you know, there's so much on offer. I can't even begin to show it all off in all its glory, because there is just that much. These are red-billed quelea, which flock in their millions sometimes, but typically in their thousands. This is at sunset. And this is the quelea on a different day, to give you an idea of the size of the flocks. It's pretty spectacular. Amazing hornbills, such a variety. This is a crowned hornbill, one of my favorites. African fish eagles, you name it. There's just amazing photography opportunities. Some birds are prettier than others. The marabou stork probably isn't one of the prettiest, but it's certainly characterful nonetheless. And they're quite fascinating to watch as they go about their business, scavenging or fishing. But there's another side to Luangwa as well. As I said, the smaller side of wildlife and some of the oddities. This is one of them. This is an elephant shrew, actually in daylight, not on a night drive, which is one of the great highlights of South Luangwa as well. But there's monkeys all over the place. This is a vervet monkey with its baby. And if you're really lucky, the wild dogs might be around. And Luangwa now is one of the best places in Africa to see wild dogs. The population's doing really, really well. It's one of the biggest in Africa. And they've got sort of one of the largest uninterrupted wilderness areas to hunt in, which is key, particularly for wild dogs. And when they're not denning, so sort of any time really from August through to November is a really good time to see them. When they're denning, they disappear off into the remote parts of the park, and they're much harder to find. Hyena's back. And crocodiles galore as well. So the river is just absolutely full of crocodiles. So and hippos. It's got the biggest population of hippos in Africa. And again, fantastic for photography. We can always spend some time either at one of the oxbow lagoons, similar to Maniples, or alternatively, we can just sit on the bank and get some amazing photos. This was actually one of the last photographs I took in Zambia. It's of a hippo in a wallow, again, with a shaft of light coming through the tree and underexposing, you can get this beautiful sort of textured portrait. So there's so much on offer in Africa, but particularly for me in South Luangwa National Park in Zambia and Maniples National Park in Zimbabwe. They are 2 of my go-to destinations, that's for sure. But Nick said that I was lucky enough to go to Australia to focus on my wildlife photography, and I went for a year. I actually went with the idea that I would earn money whilst I was there and then photograph in my spare time. And I quickly realized that if I got a job, I was basically going to work and then not see anything. So instead, I just decided to save all my money that I'd already accumulated. And I house sat, and by house sitting, I managed to travel around the country, but I also got very cheap accommodation so I could focus my efforts on my photography. I used to use the gardens a lot for wildlife photography because Australian wildlife is so different from that in the UK. And this is one of my favorite birds in Australia. It's a tawny frogmouth, just a spectacular bird, nocturnal, big beady eyes, and superbly well camouflaged. They actually think they can disappear sometimes, and you can walk right up to them in the daytime because they think they're so well hidden. Other common birds include the sulphur-crested cockatoo, very famous bird, very well recognized. Easily found in gardens, parks, in the bush around towns, beautiful birds. Rainbow lorikeet. I mean, you think of a starling or a sparrow in the UK. This is the starling or sparrow of Australia, really. This is the rainbow lorikeet, one of the most common birds you'll see. And I mean, they're just beautiful from a photographic point of view. Nice wide apertures, you get beautiful depth of field, and that color really pops out as well. Close relatives are the scaly-breasted lorikeet. This, as a photography subject, is brilliant because it has no fear. And that's one of the great things about Australia, is that a lot of the wildlife just has no fear of people. And it makes it incredibly easy to photograph. So whereas, you know, in some countries, particularly Europe, you have to work really, really hard to get beautiful imagery. In Australia, actually, I found it remarkably easy. It was just a bit of a shock to the system. Things like kookaburras, you know, one of the world's largest kingfishers, are completely tame, superb and splendid fairy wrens. They're just all over the place and just quite happy to sit. and pose for a photograph. This is an eastern yellow bush robin from Eastern Australia. And then even the marsupials are friendly as well. Kangaroos will come and graze on lawns, in parks, on golf courses. You name it, the wildlife will come to you in Australia, and I absolutely love that. And so I'm really excited that we're now running photographic safaris to Australia. Hopefully that will be when we can travel again, but we've got quite a few lined up. And we'll focus on the marsupials and the birds in particular. But things like kangaroos and this is a swamp wallaby, are all easily achievable. Red-necked wallaby or the Bennett's wallaby, as we'll see in Tasmania, basically the same species, but sort of subspecies split. And for me, the piece de resistance, I suppose, the monotremes. If you don't know what a monotreme is, it's an egg-laying mammal. So whereas Australia is famed for its marsupials, actually for me, the things that make Australia really incredible are the monotremes. So there's 3 species. In Australia, there's technically only 2. There's the short-beaked echidna, and this is the platypus. And amazingly, most people you ever meet in Australia don't know what a platypus is. Really, although they know about them, they've never seen one. They wouldn't be able to tell you where to find one. And so I spent time doing a lot of research. If you ever find national park and it's sort of on the tourist map, go to the national park next door, and you're just as I said that, this platypus basically popped up, and I turned around to try and get the guy's attention, and he disappeared into the forest. And because the cicadas are so loud, he couldn't hear me. So it was quite brilliant, really. I had this platypus all to myself, and it swam around right in front of me for about 10 or 15 minutes in broad daylight. All of these images are taken with a 300mm and are basically full frame. They're cropped to fit the screen here for you, but I'm not zooming in drastically. It really was a very special encounter. And then this is a short-beaked echidna, a bizarre creature, also known as the spiny anteater. Their diet is nearly all ants. Quite bizarre because their ankles are the wrong way round, so their back feet sort of face the wrong way. They're just an amazing species, as is the platypus. The platypus, to give you an idea, it suckles its young, but it doesn't have any teats, so it suckles its young through its skin. It just sort of leaks milk. It has a poisonous spur. It has a beaver-style tail, and then it has a duck-billed sort of face, I suppose. But it's just, these are the oddities of Australia. And if you love weird and wonderful wildlife and want to get up close and personal to it without scaring it, then Australia is the place to go. And it is just incredible, the diversity of life there. The number of endemic species is unrivaled anywhere else in the world. It is truly breathtaking. There is just nowhere like it. So you just saw there a koala, which is actually on the ground, wombats, just amazing animals, big, strong diggers. Again, very habituated at times, quite comfortable just to walk right past you. And for me, again, I have a love of canids. So to see dingoes in the wild is just magical. Very hard to see. Unfortunately, our photography tour, we couldn't fit everything in, so dingoes aren't on the agenda. But just to see these amazing animals is a real treat. And I know Nick said earlier that I won an award in Australian Nature Photographer of the Year. And this was the image, this dingo here. And this was the image featured in that competition. And it was actually used on all their billboards and advertising and things like that across Australia to sort of promote an unloved species, really, a species that's got a bad reputation, and actually try and show it in a different light. And I think that's a really key thing for me as a photographer, is capturing pictures of animals and sort of making people love them even if they don't. And this image of a dingo, for me, had that desired effect. And it seemed that everybody else thought the same thing too. So that was really special for me. So there are some amazing places in Australia, and the wildlife, as I said, it is varied, but the people are also fantastic, beautifully welcoming. And a lot of the wildlife I photographed was in gardens or sort of paddocks and, you know, things like that, farmers' fields. And a lot of it is left alone, isn't interfered with. And there are certain places where that's particularly true, like Kangaroo Island and Tasmania. And there are some really lovely areas that are just left wild. And you can see things like this Tama wallaby. This is actually a western grey kangaroo, but this is an old sheep station. So there's rewilding going on in Australia, just like there is here. If you head up to the sort of red centre, or the not necessarily the red centre, but the arid regions of Australia, you can see red kangaroos, the largest macropod, the largest kangaroo in the world. The macropod is a group within the marsupial family. And actually, what you might be able to see from this image is that red kangaroos aren't necessarily red. So the big one is a male, and he's obviously got that lovely rich russet coat, looks very big and strong because he is, you don't want to mess with him. But the kangaroo to the right is actually a young female, and they're much more of a bluey grey colour. It's only the males that turn this big sort of russet red colour. So the name only describes half of the species, really. But the males are definitely easier to see, particularly in this habitat, because they really sort of do stand tall, and sort of the contrast as well with their environment. But Australia's got so much more on offer, again, than just sort of the weird marsupials or the weird bird life. It's got amazing reptiles and amphibians. And I, for one, fell in love with frogs whilst I was there. And I know that sounds like a bizarre thing to say, but I really fell in love with frogs and photographing them. And this here is the white-lipped tree frog, or it's also known as the giant tree frog. And they're about the size of a dinner plate, to give you an idea. They are enormous. This frog actually decided, after I took the photograph, well, a series of photographs, to jump on my face. And it's kind of like being hit by a big wet fish, to be honest. It's this weird, moist, sticky texture. And it then basically used my head as a springboard to jump onto another tree. So it wasn't at all bothered. But there's so much variety around. This is a dainty tree frog. And here I kept seeing it cool. And when I shone my torch on it, I realized you could see its feet through its vocal sac as it cooled. So then I spent the next half an hour trying to work out how to position the light to ensure that I lit the feet behind the vocal sac, but also managed to get enough light through it at the same time. It took a bit of practice. Unfortunately, I couldn't get rid of the flash sort of highlight on the front of the sac, but I had another light to the side to illuminate sort of the feet underneath. So it shows you that an image might have a lot more going on than you initially think. But such variety. This is an eastern dwarf tree frog, or a sedge frog. It's only the size of my fingernail, to give you an idea. So this is all done with a macro lens. And then one of my favorites, a red-eyed tree frog, similar in appearance to the one in Costa Rica, but about half the size, much smaller, a completely different genus. And there's a very close relative called the orange-eyed tree frog, also found in Australia, which is this individual. This was another image that appeared in Australian Nature Photographer of the Year as a featured image. And this was actually taken using a torch. So again, using different techniques, a flash lit up the whole scene, and I couldn't concentrate it enough, even by sort of creating a wrap around the flash. So in the end, I used a torch with a focus beam, and that's how I got the perfect reflection. And it's actually on a leaf after a massive rainstorm, after a cyclone had come through. So there's quite a lot of water on the ground, and it was a bit of an interesting story behind the image, but it gives you an idea that sometimes you have to think around a problem when you're photographing and use your initiative. The coast is one of Australia's defining features, really. It's vast for one, but it's also one of the richest habitats. Australian pelicans, masked lapwings such as this, which has got a remnant spur on its wing, you can see. From my opinion, it should be called the spur-winged plover or lapwing, but it's not. Beach stone curlews, critically endangered across much of Australia, except for sort of in the more remote regions. oyster catchers, not the same species as ours, but look much the same. And again, by constantly trying to get low, you can improve your depth of field with these birds. And again, spending time watching them, you get to build up an understanding of their behavior. I'll give you a quick background to this image. This is a whistling kite, one of my favorite birds in Australia. And a bit like red kites in the UK, they hate landing on the ground. They love to swoop in, pick up some food and fly off again. On this occasion, I saw this bird repeatedly flying in, trying to pick something up and failing, and it decided to settle. It was on a sandbank in Moreton Bay, north of Brisbane. And so I decided to start crawling through water and through across the sandbanks to it. But it turned out, it was about 300 meters probably from where I was. It turned out actually they weren't sandbanks, they were mud banks. And I was wearing a white t-shirt and swimming shorts. And all I can say is that I stank for about 2 or 3 days of glutinous mud, thick, sticky black mud. And this is actually only taken on a 300mm lens to give you an idea. So to get that close to such a bird is pretty amazing. And it was only when I got this close that I realized it's actually clinging on to a vertebrae. I'm not sure of what. I've been told it may well be a marine mammal, but been broken up. But I don't have the knowledge to sort of identify as such a degraded vertebrae. But it was an amazing encounter. And again, the trust between wildlife, this osprey, again, only with a 300mm lens, just taken on a cliff top path. It's just spectacular. The magpies in Australia. I mean, if you want a beautiful, spectacular, synthesized bird song, listen to the Australian magpie. I can't sort of explain it enough. You've got to listen to it. It's incredible, as is the eastern whitbird. But again, they're curious. They like to find out what you're doing. So this is taken on a wide angle lens at 17mm, sat on the floor, just waiting for the bird to come to me. It's curiosity getting the better of it. Crested terns, loads of other birds utilizing the seashore, white-faced herons such as this. And one of my favorite birds, this is the sooty oyster catcher. They dive in between waves to catch mollusks. And you have to work really hard to sort of even photograph them, and to get a wave smashing behind like this just as it takes flight took quite a few days to get right. So there's so many opportunities, and if you're really lucky, you never know what will turn up. These are Australian sea lions, which are endemic obviously to Australia, but critically endangered, really unusual. And if you're really, really lucky, once in a lifetime, you'll get a shot that you're not sure you'll ever be able to beat. And for me, that was this image. This is an Australian pelican. Some of you might well know it. It featured as a winner in Bird Photographer of the Year a few years ago, and appeared in quite a lot of publications around the world. And unfortunately, also led to me appearing on the One Show. So apologies if any of you had to sort of sit and bear that. But yeah, it's an amazing privilege to get an image like this. And actually, I only took 2 photographs. It wasn't planned. It was more about luck and quick reactions and knowing my camera. So if I can leave you with one piece of advice as a wildlife photography tour leader, a lot of it's about luck, but it's also about understanding your equipment and making the most of any opportunities that come your way. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please send them through to us now. I think Nick is going to get back involved. And what he's going to do is he's going to sort of ask me some questions. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you coming online and listening to us once more. And we can't wait to see you again soon. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Bret. That's been a really great presentation, and what wonderful imagery you've been sharing with us as well. If only I could get, you know, even 10% of the quality that you've been able to show. So thank you so much, Bret. Really fascinating. And yeah, your experience with the wild dogs, you know, I'm sure for those of us on the presentation who have also been able to witness wild dogs firsthand, just a wonderful wildlife encounter that certainly will remain with me. So listen, we've just gone past 8:30, and ladies and gents, if you can just give us 10 minutes to go through a few questions that we've had come in, that would be wonderful if you could stay with us. We've got a couple of questions that relate to Finland, quite a few questions that relate to general photography, and one or two questions that relate to Australia. And I'll try and blast through them with you, Bret, as quickly as possible. First of all, there's been a lot of questions coming in. I'm just going to, and they're coming in thick and fast right now. A lot of questions that were coming in, and apologies if I'm not going to mention all the names, but in particular, Fiona Caskey, and also Amanda Woofenden, and also Jackie Hobson. Thank you so much for your questions. They are loosely around the same theme, which is all to do with what kind of level of tuition can people expect? What sort of ability are we as a company expecting people to have with photography? Which I can say straight away, we have complete beginners, and we have quite experienced, and everybody tends to help each other. Nobody keeps their settings to themselves, if you like. But Bret, could you please just provide everybody with an overview of what to expect from the photographic trip, and what to expect from the leader, not just you, but there's Nick Garbett and Alex Hyde as well. What they can expect the leader to share with them during the trip.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the most important question you can ask, really. So thank you for asking. I mean, it's actually not necessarily a very straightforward question to answer. I can literally give as much tuition as you like, and that's the same for all of our leaders. So typically what I'll start with is ability, as Nick said. There's a range. Some people join our trips with only a basic understanding of their camera, and they want to improve, and they want to do it surrounded by like-minded people. Other people are very, very comfortable with their cameras, but want to go on a trip where they know the guides will put them in the right place at the right time and maximize the opportunities. So we actually find quite often we have a mix of levels, and people often say, is that not an issue? But it's not, because actually what I can do is, I mean, we always find the sightings anyway, and those that are really comfortable will just crack on. And those that are in need of more assistance, so particularly when I'm leading a safari, for example, I usually sit in the front. The reason is that you don't get as far a view, so it's harder to see some of the wildlife. But what it enables me to do is to sort of turn around, and I can actually talk you through any settings, whether it's, if you're not familiar with your apertures or your shutter speeds, or how to combine the two to get a certain result. And then what happens when we get back to a lodge or wherever we're staying, what I can then do is I can then show you examples of what different settings do, so you can see the impact on the imagery itself. And I can also talk you through processing as well. So we can literally tailor it to suit, even on a group tour. And we keep our groups small for that reason, so that I can spend time with everybody over the course of a week and help them get what they want out of a wildlife photography holiday. So that's a really key point, is that we will do whatever we can to help whatever level anybody is.
Yeah, and I think I would absolutely echo that. And for those of you who know Nick Garbett or Alex Hyde as well, again, brilliant photographers, and they're very keen for everybody to come with whatever equipment they have to use for photography, whether it be a small bridge camera, or whether it be all the kit, all of the DSLR equipment. It may even just be iPhone, but I think the key thing that most all photographic leaders are very keen to encourage people to do is get off manual. To get onto manual, get off automatic and onto manual. And I think that's the big thing. So and that's really the starting point as well. So we do have complete beginners, joining us on these trips. Hey, listen, Bret, a couple of questions specifically in relation to Finland, from Jeff Haycon and from Dan Miller. Do you see many birds from the hides? Yeah. And what are the low light settings?
Okay, so in terms of birds, there can be an amazing diversity of birds, to be honest. You can expect to see anything from white-tailed eagle to golden-eyed ducks. If you're lucky, sometimes you can see owls as you're driving to and from the hides or around the lodge. You can even see common cranes, black grouse, capercaillie. If you're really, really lucky, you might see something like a Siberian jay, but it's pretty unusual. But yeah, there's all sorts of different things you can see. Lots and lots of ravens in particular. Black kites as well also make an appearance. So you never really know what's going to show up. But yeah, there's definitely good bird sort of watching opportunities. I'd say in terms of photography, because the hides aren't purpose built for bird photography, they're designed for the mammals. They're not necessarily the best, but in between the large predators, when you've got quieter time, there's always birds around that you can sit and watch and enjoy. In terms of settings, when it's twilight, I mean, you're limited because of sort of the low light levels, obviously. So in those twilight hours, normally I would say, unless it's an amazing sort of moment and you can do a slow shutter sort of arty style shot, it's probably best just to leave the camera and just watch and enjoy it, which is something I try and tell people to do more, to be honest. But when you sort of sunset time, the light is exquisite, and you can, ISO doesn't really ever have to go up too high for those of you that adjust their ISO manually, sorry. So typically 3,200 to 4,000, which, you know, a few years ago was unthinkable, now is perfectly fine, it's usable. You need a shutter speed really that's just going to cover the focal length. So if you're using, you know, a 300mm lens, if you've got image stabilizer, it needs to be over 300th of a second really to sort of make sure it's sharp. And then in terms of aperture, normally you're going to go wide open just because it gives you the extra light. But if you want to get more depth, then, you know, you're always using a tripod head in the hides, so it gives you that stability. So you can sometimes lower those shutter speeds down. And I've had clients before get brilliant photographs with actually really slow shutter speeds. So, but when I'm in the hides, I always go through it with people. So it's, you know, I'm always there to help. That's what I'm there for.
That's great, Bret. Thank you. We do have another quite an in-depth technical question, and I'm just going to make a comment to John Chapman, who has submitted it, which it's an excellent question, but I fear that the answer may take an awful long time to get through. So John, what I'm going to do is forward your email to Bret. And Bret will then reply to you individually. But thank you very much for your question there. But apologies. Yeah, apologies. We don't have time to go into it just now. Two last questions, which I think are very pertinent. One regarding Australia, one regarding Zim. With Australia, Dave Caulfield quite correctly asks, have the wildfires affected any of the locations that you were showing in your presentation? Do you know?
So actually, only a few of those images were taken in areas that were devastated by the wildfires. Ironically, the frogs in the subtropical rainforest were actually, it's the first big bushfires they had in over 100 years. And it was unexpected because it's so normally quite humid in sort of the summer months, because it sort of comes into cyclone season. And then a couple of places in New South Wales as well, have sadly been sort of pretty devastated. Where we're going on our tours actually is fine. We're going to areas in Tasmania and in South Australia that, touch wood, have so far escaped horrific bushfires. So fingers crossed that all stays the same for the future. But yeah, a lot of Australian wildlife, it has suffered immensely. And I've got a lot of friends that work in conservation out there, and they're fighting hard to help it. So
yeah. Well, it's, you know, very, very sobering indeed. And the last question that I'm going to pose is kind of like a marriage of a couple of questions that we've had. One from Michelle Clements. Thank you, Michelle. And also we've got another one here from B Hedge, and it's about equipment, and it's about charging facilities in the tented camps, that kind of stuff. what kind of camera equipment is expected? How much battery, how many batteries do you need to take? What is the access to charging facilities, etc.?
So in terms of camera equipment, I mean, it really is up to you. But what I would say is typically for any photographic safari, ideally you need to have a lens that has a focal length of over 300 millimeters, ideally. Just because some of the subjects obviously aren't going to sit nicely for you as you slowly drive up to them. You kind of have to drive parallel to them at a distance, or keep a certain distance anyway, because they all have a comfort zone, and every animal, each individual even, is completely different. So as guides, we have to be very wary that we don't disturb the wildlife. But a 300 millimeter is a good starting point. A good recommendation for people that aren't looking to go pro or anything like that are, the Nikon, Sony, Canon, Olympus, Fuji, whatever you want. They normally do something in the area of 100 to 500 millimeter zoom lenses. Like Canon do a 100 to 400, for example, and Nikon do several different options, including an 80 to 400. And there's so many different varieties, but those are great because it gives you flexibility. And now optically, they're very good. In terms of charging facilities, the lodges I personally go to are all, there's power 24 hours a day, really. What I typically suggest is you have enough batteries that will last you an entire day of shooting and memory cards. And then in the evenings, I usually say that what you do is you take those batteries out and put them on charge, and then have another set of batteries that will do you for the next day, so that you can kind of rotate so that you're always going. It's kind of a good tip. It means you're never going to have no batteries, because if you forget to charge them, so you can get into a nice little routine and sort of charge stuff each day, and then always have something fully charged ready for the next day.
Yeah, and I would say as well, with regard to mobile tented camps, etc.
Yep.
It is in my experience, it is usual that even with the mobile tented camping, when you're not going back to a lodge, there's usually a generator that is available, and that's usually made available for people to share. In the evenings, it is limited, but there is charging facility there, and everybody gets their turn on that. And equally, in the vehicles that are used, there's usually some clever gadgetry through the cigarette lighter that offers some kind of small charge for emergency charging if need be as well. So there's always some kind of charge available, even when you're on a mobile tented camp as well.
Yeah, I mean, I typically, to give you an idea, take my laptop with me, so it suggests that there's nearly always some sort of power supply.
Very good. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. As I said, it's just so lovely to have so many people who are so interested to hear hear about our passion and what we like doing, which is talking about wildlife, talking about travel, all with the intention of getting back to doing it as soon as we can. So, as I said at the top, thank you so much for all your support. Thank you for your patience and understanding with what we're all having to go through at the moment. We will get you back out around the world just as soon as we can. In the meantime, thank you all very much. Do please go online and order a copy of our new wildlife brochure if you haven't already done so, and do have a good browse through the pages of our website, and do contact us when you're ready to go for it, and do remain inspired. But thank you all very, very much, and we hope to see you at one of our next evenings, which is going to be happening next week. If you want to have a full look at the rundown of all of the events that we've got, do please have a look at the events page on our website. So everybody, thank you very much. I'm going to end the presentation now. I wish you all a very good evening and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.